Live. Hi, everyone. I'm so
Hi,
happy
everyone.
to be here. I'm so glad that you could join us tonight at the online edition of the San Antonio Book Festival. I'm really looking forward to our talk tonight with Kristin Cashore and Bridget Kimmer in conversation. And I just want to say that we'll hope you'll consider purchasing Bridget and Kristin's books from Nowhere Bookshop, the Book Festival's bookseller. Independent bookstores have been having such a hard time during the pandemic. So we'll hope you'll support them and these writers in the festival by purchasing their amazing books. And you can just click on the Buy the Book button on the festival site. So I'm going to start by introducing these amazing authors. Bridget Kimmer is a New York Times bestselling author of dark and alluring young adult novels like A Curse So Dark and Lovely, or So Dark and Lonely, More Than We Can Tell, and Letters to the Lost, as well as paranormal YA like the Elemental series. And her most recent release and the conclusion in the Cursebreaker series just came out a few months ago, A Vow So Bold and Deadly. A full-time writer, Bridget lives in the Baltimore area with her husband, her boys, her dog, and her cat. When she's not writing or being a mom, you can usually find her with her hands wrapped around a dumbbell, which I find like awesome. And then I'll introduce Kristin Cashore. Kristin Cashore grew up in the Northeast Pennsylvania countryside as the second of four daughters. She received her bachelor's from Williams College and her master's from the Center for the Study of Children's Lit at Simmons College. And she has worked as a dog runner, a packer in a candy factory, an editorial assistant, a legal assistant, and a freelance writer. She currently lives in Boston, and her epic fantasy novels in the Graceling Realm have won many awards and so much high praise, including the ALA Best Books for Young Adults, SLJ Best Book of the Year, and Booklist Editor's Choice, to name a few. And Winterkeep is the fourth installment in the Graceling Realm series. It just came out this year. Can you each give a short little description of your most recent releases for those who may not, have gotten a primer? Kristin, you can start.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for that lovely intro, Amanda. So my book, Winterkeep, takes place in my Graceling Realm world. You can read it even if you haven't read the other books, but there are some carryover characters. So if you have read the other books, that might be fun. So for the past 5 years or so, Queen Bitterblue has reigned as the Queen of Vonsea, trying to rebuild her nation after her father's horrific rule. And then she learns about this continent to the east called Torla, and she decides to go ahead and send some envoys to the closest nation there, Winterkeep. And Winterkeep is a place where there are telepathic foxes that bond to humans, and where there are airships that fly through the air. So, it's different from the world she comes from. But then her envoys drown in mysterious circumstances. And Bitterblue decides, okay, I'm going to go over there myself and try to figure out what's going on here. And then on the way there, another tragedy unfolds. And from there, you just get what I hope is like a really fun adventure story with a lot of romance and heartbreak and political intrigue and family drama. It's told in 5 different perspectives. One is Bitterblue, one is Bitterblue's colleague, Gideon. One is a young woman in Winterkeep, Lavisa Cavenda, who is one of my favorite people to write, who is a little bit of a spy, a little bit of a liar. She's in school. Her parents are very important politicians. She's sort of the key to unlocking everything that's going on if she can kind of get her shit together and change a little bit. And then the other 2 perspectives are not humans. One of them is a telepathic fox, and one of them is this gigantic sea creature who lives under the ocean. So all of these different threads and elements are coming together, hopefully to create an exciting, interesting story, or character-driven story. That's my best explanation.
Yeah, for sure. Go ahead, Bridget.
Sure. And Kristin, that's amazing. I don't know how you balanced all of those points of view. That is just
Thank
phenomenal.
You. A lot of revisions.
I'm sure. I'm Bridget Kimmer. I have 12 young adult novels, but my most recent few are the Cursebreaker series. And the first book was A Curse So Dark and Lonely. The third book just came out, A Vow So Bold and Deadly. So the trilogy as of this year is complete. But I'll tell you about the first book in case you're not familiar, because telling you about the third book, if you don't know me, is weird. A Curse So Dark and Lonely is a very loose Beauty and the Beast retelling about a girl named Harper who lives in Washington, D.C., so from our world, who one day is playing lookout for her brother on the streets of Washington, D.C., because he's doing some kind of nefarious things to get money for their family. And she sees what she thinks is a man abducting a young woman. Now, Harper decides that she is going to intervene, that she's going to try to stop this abduction from taking place. But instead, she gets kidnapped herself and transported to this fantasy kingdom where there is a prince who has been cursed to repeat the autumn season of his 18th year over and over again until he can convince a girl to fall in love with him. Now, Harper wants absolutely nothing to do with this spoiled prince in this castle and his lands, which have kind of started getting invaded by an enemy force. Harper just wants to get home so that she can help her brother and protect her mom, but the only way to get home from the cursed kingdom of Emberfall is to fall in love. So it's a fun series. I loved writing it. I love my characters. I love my fierce heroine, Harper, and all of the trouble she gets into with Prince Ren and his guardsman, Commander Gray. Yeah, I love it.
Awesome. Yeah, it's interesting you both mention character, because I just really feel that's one thing that really connects both these series is how character driven they are. And while still having like such a robust plot, which is just, it's my favorite thing to read. So I love that. So I think I'd love to start talking a bit about actually writing fantasy and sort of your favorite sort of way to approach fantasy in the way that is particularly unique to you. And like what aspects of fantasy do you think that you sort of seek to interrupt and overturn? Whichever of you can start if you'd like.
That's a cool question.
That is a cool question. All right, so I'll go. And it's not a sexy answer, and because I'm going to talk about world building, and I feel like every other fantasy author always has this amazingly brilliant, complex way of designing their worlds and building their characters and figuring out like where does the magic come from and what is the structure. And I cannot do that at all. And one of my favorite things with fantasy is that I could really throw whatever I want onto the page, and if it's cool, I get to keep it. And sometimes I'll get 50 pages past, and I'll be like, oh no, if everybody is telepathic, this just destroys my plot. And I think that there's something really fun with fantasy that you can really play with all of those different kinds of rules that you can't do when you write contemporary. Like, Kristen, what do you think?
I mean, I had to laugh when you said if everybody's telepathic, it ruins my plot, because it's, getting a little off track, but like I have had this problem so often, like a single telepathic character in your book, and suddenly everything is so much harder because they always know what's going on. And the whole point of the plot structure is to try to keep the reader from figuring out what's going on too soon, and try to keep the characters also from figuring out what's going on. So I mean, again, not to completely get off track, but like I have had to get the telepathic character seriously sick for a while, send him on a trip, make him exhausted so he'll fall asleep. And it's really like you create really funny twists and tangles for yourself when you have so much cool freedom from, what sorts of things to work with. I mean, I would say in terms of, what trying to subvert or overturn, what my sort of approach is for that sort of thinking, it's more along the lines of, okay, I created this fantasy world. I don't think I was actually all that creative when I created that world. There are a lot of things I did not think through. Now I'm stuck with them. How can I fix that well, let's just now and then expand the world, show this new part of the world that gives us a new perspective on the old world, that gives us new options in the new world. And then with Winterkeep, I have very much, so I expanded between Graceling and Fire, my first two books, I expanded my world. And then with Winterkeep, I've expanded it again, because when I first wrote these books, I set them in kingdoms, because that's where you set fantasy books. And then as I kept writing and writing, I kept realizing, like, why did I do this to these characters? Like, I care about these characters. One of Bitterblue is a queen. In my book, Bitterblue, the main character is a queen, and it's a really terrible trap for a person to be in. So why did I create these really problematic political systems for these people that I want to have lots of different options and adventures? Well, okay, if I expand my world, I can create a different kind of government over in Winterkeep. And, you know, so I created this sort of, this representative, it's a complicated sort of representative democracy that doesn't work great. Like, it's filled with people who have like special interest groups and tons of corruption, but it's different. And I think it's also familiar. And it's just, you know, now all my characters worldwide can see, oh, these different things are possible, where can we go with this? So I guess my answer is that a lot of times, if I am trying to subvert, often I'm trying to subvert my own mistakes.
That's so interesting. Yeah, that's so interesting. I think often about how, like, yeah, there is this sort of sense that we're creating this world for our characters to play in, and then we build these structures into the world that absolutely shatter our characters' ability to, you know, make decisions for themselves and such. So it's really also interesting to think about all the sort of, when you pick something to write about in a fantasy world, whatever you pick, it's gonna come with some sort of like problem. Like some sort of, like, you're gonna run into down the line, like, oh, why did I think I wanted to do this? This is gonna cause me all these narrative issues in the end. But ultimately, like, that's where you can find, you know, so much magic and stuff.
Yeah, like when you're being forced to find a creative solution, sometimes you do.
And that's part of the fun of it, really.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. So also, what we talked a little briefly about how both of your series are so character driven. I really love that sense when you're reading a book of how firm that character is in your mind. I mean, Harper, I really love A Curse So. I'm sorry, I can never remember the whole thing. I always say the wrong word.
It's okay.
A Curse So Lovely, A Curse So Dark and Lonely. Yeah, but I loved how I love kind of getting in a fantasy world, but also getting a second world fantasy, but getting a sort of character who is thinking modernly, as well as, like, we get that with Louisa. So if you could talk about both of those characters and how they sort of came to you and how you built them. Bridget, you can start.
Should I go first this time?
Oh, sure.
Oh,
yeah,
go
you
ahead.
can go first. Yeah, I didn't realize.
So yeah, so Louisa is the youngest character in the book, and I actually think she's the youngest main character I've ever written. She's 16, and she has 3 younger siblings, and I've always wanted to write a boarding school book, and this is sort of my boarding school book. She lives in a boarding school in the main city of Winterkeep. I just love that, like, everyone's all together and they're eating their meals together and they all have their dorm rooms, and it's just it's this perfect little, I don't know,
social
setup for everyone to have drama. And so I think, you know, I'm never really sure just exactly where my characters come from, but I knew that she was suspicious of everyone. Like, she doesn't trust anyone. And I knew that she has reasons for that. And I knew that she's jaded, she's cynical. I think, you know, a lot of characters are some version of yourself, and Louisa goes through a little bit of a transformation that eventually she's connecting more with the world and also thinking more of politics as something she could affect, like that actually maybe there is possibility of doing good or change. And so I think maybe I was trying to write, I was trying to write about Lovísa. I wasn't trying to write about like kids today or anything like that, but maybe there's some part of me that is being influenced by the news around us and by my own disaffection and feeling of powerlessness in the world and feeling like, well, what can I even do to help with this? Well, okay, maybe there are some little things I could do. Maybe that's where she came from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah.
I with Harper. So when I first started writing A Curse So Dark and Lonely, it was 2016 is when it sold, and it sold on proposal. And I wrote it. I had started, doing the majority of the draft in the summer before the 2016 election. And then the election happened, and no matter where anybody falls on the political spectrum, I think we can all agree that everyone was rather shocked by the results of that election. And creatives kind of went through a bit of a challenging time trying to kind of write past that, because it was just such a time of shock in the atmosphere. And during that time, I really started to think about, like, what obligations do world leaders have to their people? In one of the greatest things about fantasy is that it can make really complicated topics very accessible, especially for teenagers. So I was probably about 80,000 words into the book at the time the election happened. And I was kind of doing this deep dive revision before I could write the ending. And I totally changed the structure of the book. I went from third person to first person, and really kind of changed how my characters were. And I knew that I wanted Harper to come into Emberfall, where, the Prince Wren, is cursed, but she gets there and she's like, okay, woe is me, your world is so awful. You live in this big castle with this endlessly replenishing supply of food. Like, you're basically this rich dude living in this castle, saying poor me, when really you have so many opportunities to do different things for your people, despite the fact that you are cursed. And it was really fun to play with Harper's character, and just to have her show Ren that you can be compassionate without giving anything away, without showing any weakness, that empathy is possible without having to give up power. And I think that was one of the most fun things to do with her character. I wanted her to be a bit of a badass without having to be this sword wielding fantasy girl.
Got such a great attitude.
Yeah.
Love her attitude.
I just found that so refreshing. Like, always, especially in dealing with high fantasy, a lot of times we're dealing with characters who are very accustomed to wealth, like not even seeing the world around them. And I found that so refreshing. Did you always know that Harper was going to come from our world, or did you ever imagine it as just taking place in Emberfall?
No, I always knew she was going to come from our world. I had written a very short, intro to the book in 2012, because I had been changing agents. And then my publisher at the time, they were a romance publisher. They were like, we have no idea what to do with Portal Fantasy. So it kind of sat on my hard drive for 4 years until I pulled it back out and started working on it again. But I always wanted Harper to come from our world.
Yeah, I like that, because and also with Lovísa, I'm really actually interested in the high fantasy that is meeting teens of today actually where they are in terms of thinking complex things about politics. I like, even not even complex things, but that are simple, that we know, but that it really resonates with them, that I think sometimes maybe older readers may not see as like interests of teens, but it really is today.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, we talked like briefly about world building, but like Bridget, you said, like, you kind of really take a, like, I'm gonna throw in like what I want to do type thing. And I love that. I follow the rule of I just make a thing of list of things I like, and I'm just like, can I pull this in here? What can I pull into this hat? But if you could tell me a little bit more about each of your world building processes, and also along with that, some detail in your world that is just your favorite thing. I have to admit, the overflowing kitchens in the castle in Emberfall, I was big into that. I love a magic kitchen. It's great, a magic kitchen. It is.
I need a magic kitchen, right? Yeah, I don't have any big world building rules. I do think sometimes, especially when aspiring writers ask me, they're like, what are your tips for world building? I do think people need to be patient with themselves and give themselves the grace to let it be wrong. Throw something out there that's fun. And as far as in my books, like my favorite bit of all my favorite stuff is character stuff.
Okay.
It's if I could just have my characters sit in a room and talk to each other, that would truly be ideal. Like, I don't know if I have a favorite world building thing. Maybe I'll see it's spoilery.
Oh, yep.
Yeah, all my favorite stuff is like spoilery.
Okay.
I do love, and it's character, but I do love when Harper meets Commander Gray, who is the head of Ren's Royal Guard and the only person who is trapped in this curse with him. When I first put him on the page, he was not going to be a super major character. He was just going to be a supporting role. And as soon as I put him in his first scene with Harper, I loved him so much, and I was like, he needs to do more. And I was really happy with how that all turned out, because I loved him as a character.
Yeah, he's so alive on the page.
Yeah, agree. I forget the question. What was the question?
Oh, approach to world building and like your favorite world building detail. In Winterkeep.
Yeah. So approach to, I mean, I think it might be a little bit like what you were describing, Amanda. Like, oh, I love this thing. Can I get this to work here? Every time I expand my world, it's to a place that is connected but has a slightly different kind of magic than the last place. So it was a lot of fun to think, okay, I'm moving into this new world now, this world of Winterkeep. I really like the idea of telepathic animals that are sort of like pets. You think they're pets, but they actually have different ideas. Like that's where the telepathic foxes came from. And then this creature who lives under the sea. And then there are also these animals called silver cows that are also telepathic, who are sort of like a combination between a manatee and a seal sort of thing. I will say that some of it, I find, I don't know if you guys find this, but so I wrote a book that wasn't a Graceling Realm book called Jane Unlimited that has a bunch of different genres running through it and has a telepathic dog and has some sea creatures that are a little bit telepathic. Like I find that often what I'm writing before, some of the ideas of it will pull me toward the next thing I write. And even if it's a completely different book, there's always this little wire of connection. Like, it's not even that I am building that world. It's like I'm building this big, chaotic, complicated, like overworld that different things fit in different places, you know?
Yeah.
And in terms of favorite world building things, I think similarly to Bridget, my favorite things tend to be character things, but some of my favorite character things have to do with moments of magic. I really came to love the relationship that developed between the sea creatures and the land creatures in Winterkeep. So I'll choose that as my favorite.
Yeah, I love those silver cows. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, guys, I should have mentioned before, but you guys can throw questions into the Q&A box because we'll get to questions in a little bit. Sorry, going through here. Also curious about your writing process. it's always like the age-old like question pantser plotting, but I kind of feel like that sort of flattens the whole thing because, I mean, is it ever really all one thing? But I'm curious, what sort of writer you perceive yourself to be and what your process is like. Yeah.
Yeah, I am definitely a plotter. I can't start a book if I don't have at least some sense of structure, some sense of plot structure. My books are very plotty, and there's often a lot of intrigue and mystery, and I don't know how anyone can do that and not plan it out beforehand. I just feel like you end up with like, that's why some TV shows just go off the rails and never make any sense, because the writers didn't work it out beforehand, and I just can't imagine, like, it's so hard to write a book even when you know what's supposed to happen. I can't imagine writing down and just being like, oh, I'll just, whatever comes to me, I'll make it happen, and then I'll figure out at some point. Like, I know some writers do that. I can't even imagine. I am a very, I recently finished a draft of something. It takes place over the course of 9 days, and before I even started, I had a big folder for each day with the different things that happen, and then on each day, I'm not always that plotty of plot structure, mappy ahead of time, but I can be that, like, that's one extreme. And then a book I have in revisions right now, I didn't necessarily know the exact plot pieces because it's a little bit of a less plotty book. It's more about a character arc, but I did know part 1 takes place here because this thing is happening. Part 2 takes place here because this thing is happening, and part 3 takes place here because this thing is happening. So I still had little, like, little containers to fill that I knew about beforehand. That's me. I need a little. I'm a control freak, and I need a little. It's so scary to write a book. Like, I need a little assurance.
It's so scary. It is such a, like, it's like a free fall. And then, if you're plotting, it's kind of, you got a rope down there, but also some people like to free fall. What about you, Bridget?
Yeah.
I free fall right off the cliff.
Yay! I'm glad we have one of both.
Yeah.
So I'm not that bad. So I used to very much just be a pantser. Like, hey, let me give my characters a scenario, throw them on the page, let's see what happens. I do now need to have some idea of like what the ultimate conflict is going to be. And I do generally write myself, a good 2 to 3 page synopsis of what I hope is going to happen. So I'm a very loose plotter. Sometimes things will happen when I'm writing that take me by surprise, and then my synopsis goes out the window. Sometimes I'll discover that I like a character a lot more than I thought that I did, and I will just completely revamp the entire story to incorporate that. I really like to discover things as I'm writing. For me, that's one of the most fun parts of writing. I have never been an ultra detailed plotter. I can't do it. And I have so much admiration for people who do. It amazes me because I feel like my life would be easier if I did that.
I don't know.
I am like a plotter, but I like to plot through character. But still, I mean, I can spend a long time on an outline, and not even just an outline, lots and lots of pre-writing, and that can also very much be a trap. Like, you can like almost work out too many problems as you plan it, and then like leave not enough for yourself. And so I do like a little of the magic in between.
Do you? I'm curious, Amanda, if you like, as a plotter like me, like, when Bridget was saying she likes surprises, or she'll find herself changing things, like, even though I am a plotter, that also happens. Like, something will get completely turned around and I'll have to redo the whole thing, or someone will surprise me. They'll be pulling me toward them when I thought I was going to be pulled towards someone else. So do you find yourself, when that happens, I kind of need to do the whole plot again.
Yeah, I'm like happy about it. I think sometimes it can depend on a character. Like, sometimes a character is louder than another, and they just make you do what they want to do and not what you thought that they would want to do.
Yes.
But also certain things I don't plot because I love them so much and I want to sort of leave them for myself. So I never ever plot or like think about where a kiss is going to be. Cause I want it to I want to be able to like have that like surprise of thinking, oh right, that's the moment, you know.
Yeah, I do that too, actually.
Yeah, like I mean, you know, if that's one of those things where you have to let that kind of stuff be a surprise, and always, you know, the chemistry of characters also surprises you. The characters who conversation moves at like such a quick clip, you know, and the characters who it's a whole spectrum, definitely.
I had a character when I was writing Bitterblue, in the book Bitterblue. In the initial draft of that book, she was 16, and I was having her befriending a character, an older character, and at a certain point, my editor at the time was like, Kristen, would you consider, do you think maybe we should make Bitterblue 18? Because this friendship is starting to have some vibey vibes. And I was like, right. And so we, you know, and that was not part of the plan at all, but we aged her up a little bit just so that wouldn't start to verge on creepy. And it led somewhere for Bitterblue. And that was a lovely surprise.
That's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's weird how what's happening in our head is like real life so much of the time. Like, we're really not in control.
Yeah.
Not at all.
It's us in control, or thinking that we're the illusion of control, but there is also just a part of it that is just, you know, purely magical and not something that you can even, you know, put your finger on. Another question I wanted to ask is, what is the sort of best writing advice that you either have learned or like realized or heard from another person? You can go ahead, Bridget.
Oh wow. Best writing advice from another person.
So, you know,
I've got one. Okay, so I write all of my books in dual point of view, with the exception of A Vow So Bold and Deadly, which has 4, and my current secret project, which has 3. And I will often write scenes from both sides just to see which version works better. And I was telling a friend of mine, another writer, I was, you know, saying, you know, this just takes me so much time. I can never, you know, decide, you know, which one to write from first. And she said, well, wouldn't it make the most sense to write scenes from the point of view of whoever has the most at stake in that scene? And she just says this, like, sipping her coffee. And I'm like, you just blew my mind. Like, of course that makes sense. Why would I write it from someone else's? And that really kind of helped me focus when I write in those alternating points of view.
Yeah. And also helps you to remember that every time you kind of start a scene, it's really good to know who the stakes are really like high for in that scene. Yeah. What about you, Kristen?
Well, I was listening to a talk by Linda Sue Park. It must have been, 12, 13 years ago, in which she said, she was talking, so I had just written, I hadn't published anything yet, so it was actually longer ago than that. It doesn't matter. It was a long time ago, and I wasn't a published writer yet, but I was writing, and I was a beginning writer, so dealing with all of the like self-doubt about whether this was even a waste of my time and how I have no idea what I'm doing at any moment. And she said, she described her writing process as, you know, if you try to write, and of course I'm paraphrasing, but if you sit down and you think to yourself, I'm writing an entire book, oh my God, I'm writing an entire book, you're going to get so overwhelmed that you're not going to be able to like calm down and work. So you sit down and you say to yourself, I'm writing a book, and today I will write 2 pages. And the moment she said that, like something inside me clicked, and I have every single day when I sit down now, I recite to myself, I'm writing a book, and today I'll write 2 pages. I write by hand, so I have my notebook, and I write the date, and like I try to write one page and then another page that gets me to the same point in the notebook where I wrote that date. And if I do that, then if it takes me 8 hours to write those 2 pages, I still had my writing day. And especially early on when I was writing Fire and Bitterblue, while there was a lot of stuff going on in my life and I was really distracted, that was so comforting to me. That little, like, you need to take it a little bit at a time. And then the other important piece of advice, I don't remember where this came from, but that I have learned, maybe just from my own experience, is so part of writing is the voices that tell you that what you're writing isn't very good, and tell you you're never going to finish, and tell you this isn't really a book, and like tell you no one's going to like this. All those voices that are constantly saying, you know, this might not work. This thing, you're trying to do a really hard thing and it might not work. Those voices never ever go away, but the more you write despite them, the less they bother you, like to the point where now I hardly ever, like, I sort of imagine them sitting next to me in a chair, these sad little voices who are saying all these things, and like they might need a hug or something because they're really sad and pathetic and they're just really scared. They're scared I'm not going to be able to write this book. But as long as they don't stop me writing, like, yes, you can sit there and say whatever you need to say, but while you're doing that, I'm going to write my 2 pages today. It really, I don't know, over time, I feel that I've developed a sort of a resilience to the doubts that has been really rewarding. So I'm not sure what the advice there is, but keep on going and don't let those voices stop you. And don't expect them to ever go away. That's just part of being a writer.
Yeah, that helped me. I remember when I was in grad school, we would have these sort of weekend little classes, these little workshops, and Andrea Davis Pinkney, one that she has this thing she calls it the committee, those voices, and she just says, you know, you have to, every time you sit down, you have to, you know, talk to the committee and tell them, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to engage with you today, and then, you know, you sit down and you get to work, and that's always stuck with me. Yeah. And you know, it's interesting. I was thinking when you were talking, Bridget, about sort of how you write both sides of the story, sort of both POVs, and how interestingly, I feel when you're getting those sort of dual POVs, you also sort of, in moving from A Curse So Dark and Lonely into the second book, A Heart So Fierce and Broken, you also sort of get that the both sides twisted again with Leah and Gray. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about that writing experience.
Sure. So when I first started writing the sequel to Curse, you know, I knew that I was introducing Leah Mara, who is the daughter of the queen of the neighboring kingdom. And Leah Mara, I knew I was going to have Leah Mara and Gray, and they were going to, you know, ultimately have a romantic relationship. And when I first started writing, I had all 4 characters' points of view, and it just wasn't working. And I'd written probably 40 or 50,000 words, and I emailed my editor, and I was like, this book just feels too heavy. Like I'm recounting the same things from different points of view. And she said, do we really need to have Ren and Harper? Like, can you just write Gray and Leah Mara? And I said, well, aren't people going to miss them? And she said, well, maybe, but they'll get over it. And she was right. She was right. Like, once I got rid of their points of view, it really opened things up for me to be able to talk about how things were happening in the kingdom, both from Leah Mara's point of view and also from Gray's point of view. And it really allowed me to show things from just different people.
Sorry, talking to the dog off screen here.
Okay.
Yeah. And also, Kristen, in writing Winterkeep, sort of, you get to have your characters view their own world, their own like lives in being in Winterkeep in a different way. And I wonder if you could talk about how that was, and thinking about, you know, kingdoms versus republics. Obviously, we don't see So the overwhelming amount of, fantasy countries we see typically tend to have a monarch structure. So if you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah, one of the things that I've loved from the beginning with my books is those moments when, so you write a book in one person's point of view and in one place, then you write another book from someone else's point of view, and that person has um, a point of view about the same things that the other that you may have read about in a different book, and sort of getting that different feeling. Like, for example, when I wrote Bitterblue, suddenly I was writing about Katza and Poe from Bitterblue's point of view, which is very different. Has a very different brain than Katza does, so it was a different way of looking at them. So I feel like there's a similar thing that happens with lands, with kingdoms. You bring these people over to a new place, and everything is so in Winterkeep is so unusual. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine what a republic would seem like if all I had ever known was kingdoms. It's something I've been trying to play with from the beginning, because I have a few of the kingdoms in the earlier books are starting to break up and try to reach some sort of republic stage. But to actually be there and see the way the government works, and see that actually there's a lot of similarity here. It is still just all the wealthy people who are in power, and there is a lot of corruption and a lot of cynicism and a lot of just people lying about what they believe in order to get what they want. So I don't know. I just had a lot of fun with, okay, which is better? A completely corrupt republic full of over-rich people who are just trying to get richer, or a kingdom where you actually have a queen who is trying really, really, really hard to help anyone? I'm not sure. It creates interesting questions, which is just one of the fun things about writing the books and thinking about the books. Like, what now I have this setup, what can I do with the next one? I'm not really sure, but it's one of the things that is exciting about the writing.
Yeah, you're doing another Graceling Realm book, right? Or have I?
Yes,
okay.
I'm writing. It's in revisions already. It's from Hava's point of view. So yeah, Hava has the ability to change what you think you see when you look at her. So she could actually be behind your bookshelf right now looking like a bunch of books, and we wouldn't necessarily see her there. That sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such a cool ability. And I have forgotten, or I have to ask my final question. I think we can move on to audience questions. I always love to ask this question. What was the book or any other type of media, it could be a movie or a TV show, that made you decide that writing was for you? Bridget, how would you go first?
So I don't know if it was the book so much, but more the experience surrounding the book. When I was 12 years old, I was a huge reader, and my mom would take me to the library all the time, and we were very close with the librarian. I swear she knew every YA book in the YA section. And the librarian happened to mention to my mom that she was publishing her first novel. And my mom was like, of course we'll support you. I'll buy it. And she bought it for me, and it was a YA novel, and it was The Silver Kiss by Annette Curtis Claus. And I loved that book so much. Do you know that book?
Yes, yes.
Right? Isn't it amazing? I read it so many times.
What? That's wild.
Right, I read it.
What's it called? The Silver.
The Silver Kiss. And it was so good, and I loved it so much. And it just, I could quote you lines from that book right now. I probably read it 25 times. And it was such a moment for me that this normal person wrote a book. And that has always really sat with me, that just anybody could be a writer. And it's really surreal because Annette Curtis Claus and I are now friends on Facebook, and like I know about her cats. So it's just this weird full circle life moment when we became friends on Facebook. Yeah, it's amazing, but it's such a good book.
Wow.
That's super cool. Wow. Yeah.
So I'm not, so it's hard to say what book made me know I want to be a writer because it's all the books, but I did come up with one that I think had a big impression on me. Anne of Green Gables. Because she's so lonely and she's so imaginative and she becomes a writer. You know, I think books where I could relate to the girls in particular and they become a writer. So I also picked up my copy of Little Women because even though I think this book has so many problems and I have objections to things in that book, Jo is me. I mean, and that the scene when Amy puts her manuscript in the fireplace is just the most heartrending thing in all of books. And I have understood that from them. So I think those would be my two. But I have The Silver Kiss on my list now, and I'm going to read this book.
It's super short. Like it's typical, I don't know, 1992 YA vampire.
Perfect. I love that old YA though. I really do.
Yes.
I really. Sometimes I love to revisit it because it is just it's a different thing, but it's delightful as well.
Wow.
So I think we can take some of these audience questions now. Here we go.
Your dogs have a question.
Okay, I think she is relaxing now. Okay, so my first question is from Robin. What books impacted your lives the most when you were young adults? Which hopefully I may have already ruined this question, but yes.
You didn't ruin it. I can't think of words. Exactly. Yeah. Well, no. Just introduced it early.
Yeah. Can you think of any others, or I can, go to it?
I mean, everything.
Yeah, but
everything
like all of them. I was a huge fan of all the 90s YA, like Christopher Pike, Cynthia Voigt. I just ordered Jackaroo and On Fortune's Wheel from Cynthia Voigt.
Those books influenced my writing without a doubt. Every cold scene in my writing, I'm thinking about those books. Yeah, they're so wonderful.
They're so good.
Yeah, I mean, for me, every Nancy Drew. I mean, I read whatever was in the library, and we didn't have a very good local library, but I read everything I could get my hands on. I was obsessed with Nancy Drew. I mean, I read them now, and they're so horrible, but I couldn't get enough of them then. Judy Blume, Cynthia Voigt, and then I got into mysteries, so Agatha Christie and Dorothy Sayers, and then all the classics, Jane Austen, and just
all of them.
Devoured it,
Yeah, and in that time, it's like literally about devouring books, like eating books for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Yeah, 3 square books a day. I have another question from Lily. This question is, here we go. How has your writing been impacted during the past year? What tips or strategies have you turned to get through this bleak time in our history? Or have you found writing to be a point of personal refuge? How about you go first, Kristen?
Yeah, I can answer that one. I actually, so full disclosure, I do not have children. I feel like the answer to this question often hinges on that because I have not been homeschooling children for the past year. I even have continued to have an office outside the home. So there are ways in which my daily schedule really hasn't changed, and there are ways in which I have been given more solitude than I even normally have, and have really been able to hermit and be in a cave and get a lot of, be able to focus and get a lot of solitude from writing this past year. Writing has really, in a large way, it's one of the main things that has gotten me through the past year. I also wrote a book that was about this time that we're in. I wrote a short, that book that I talked about earlier that takes place over the span of 9 days, takes place during the pandemic. And I think that, well, the pandemic and the election. And I think that writing that book was a way of getting through that time. Like, if you decide you're going to write a project, write about the time you're in, suddenly it becomes a research project. Your life becomes a research project. So the things about it that are really hard and sad and stressful are material. Like you can get this little objective distance from it because you have a different way of thinking about it. And it doesn't work all day long, but it works some of the time, and it gives you a different framing. So I would say, yes, I have been able to find solace in writing, but also writing has been one of the things that has gotten me through.
So this is such a hard question, because I do have kids. I have 3 young kids, and I also have a mom who lives somewhat locally, and she's in poor health, and she's also 78 years old, but also super independent, so she lives on her own. But I do a lot of her grocery shopping and all those kinds of things. And when the pandemic hit, it really threw my whole life for a loop. You know, I went from my kids going to school and me having kind of this block of quiet time where I could write or I could go to Starbucks or anything like that, to suddenly I have 3 young kids at home. I have my husband working from home. I have my mom who cannot now leave the house to go get groceries and things like that. And everything just felt incredibly traumatic. You know, and it was really, really hard to write through that period of time. And really, I would say the one thing that kept me going at that point, because I was mostly drafting A Vow So Bold and Deadly, and I would say that the one thing that kept me going was, you know, I would sit down and have a conversation with myself every single morning, because I would have to write from 4:30 a.m. till 8 a.m. because after that I did have to do the homeschooling because my husband was on the clock, and I couldn't write at the end of the day because I was too exhausted. So every morning I would sit myself down and say, Bridget, you have published 11 novels. You have worked your whole life to get to this point. Do not throw your career away because you can't write right now. Mm-hmm. And I don't read a lot of my reviews, but somebody had tagged me in a review of A Vow So Bold and Deadly, and it was a really beautiful, insightful review. And I never comment on reviews, and this is one that I wish that I could have, because it was very insightful, and it said something like, you know, you can tell this book was written during the pandemic because there is this bleakness to it with this undercurrent of hope, and it really touched me because that is really how I felt while I was writing it.
That's wonderful. Amanda, we can't hear you.
You might be muted.
Naturally, I'm sorry. Oops.
It's okay.
I was trying to talk out my dog and all of her noises. I have a question from Robin. Do you have any recommendations for craft books?
Oh. Of course, every craft book I've ever read just flies straight out of my mind when I'm asked to recommend them.
I love Bird by Bird by
yes.
I'm not sure why I can't say her name right now, and but it's one of my favorite books. It's just something I keep on my bedside to sort of like ground me in my writing, and yeah, like literally, why can't I say her name right now?
Annie Lamott.
Annie Lamott, yes, Lamont, yes. It's just one of these like comfort items for me that makes, you know, I think even sometimes not even someone giving me so much craft like advice, like hard detailed things to do, so much as someone talking about their experience of writing makes you feel sort of less alone in this whole terrifying thing that you're doing, and I find that to be like the most helpful.
I think that would have been my. Oh no, go ahead, Bridget.
Oh no, I was just going to say that I don't have any real crafting books that are coming to mind, but I do have these two cool books that are on my bedside table, and one is like I don't remember the author, but one is the Emotional Wound Thesaurus, and one is the something like Character Trauma Thesaurus, and they're so cool to just flip through, and it has all different kinds of scenarios, like if this has happened to your character. Have you seen those?
Yeah, I have them on my Kindle. Yeah.
Yeah, they're really just cool books just to flip through for kind of inspiration. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And sort of seeing these emotional sort of connective threads of how like emotion change together. Yeah, they're really good. Yeah. This is a good question from Dewana. I feel like in my writing, my characters don't feel like real characters. I don't know how to make them authentic. Any tips?
Ooh, I might have a tip. And this might not be relevant to the to the questioner, but so throw it out if it's not helpful. But when I start a book, my characters don't feel like real characters until I'm done. Like the whole first draft is like I plan it out and I think I know who these people are. But when it comes time for that translation to the page, maybe I can get a good conversation going and I can feel it a little, but I think I know who they are, and then when I'm on the page, I just don't. And it isn't until I spend tons of time with them that I start to get to know them. So I guess I see that question and I wonder, well, are you expecting it to happen too soon? Maybe see if it's still not happening in your second draft.
Right. Yeah, honestly, that's when they start to feel a little fleshly because, those drafts can feel very, Paper Mario flat. Go ahead, Bridget.
No, and I would also say I think sometimes, especially when I read manuscripts from beginning writers, is that sometimes we're trying to let the plot drive too much, and every action the character takes and every thought the character has just relates to the plot, and then that character really feels very two-dimensional. And I think throwing other details in there, throwing outside challenges that have nothing to do with the plot at your character and seeing what happens, I think can really help flesh that out.
That's a great idea. It made me think of something else too, which is something I try to do at every point, because I have this structured plot, but it can come apart at any point. Just keep asking yourself, so I have a plan for what the character's supposed to do in this scene, but what would they actually do? What would they actually do when faced with this situation? And then let that diverge from your plan if necessary. Also get them talking. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If they're talkative. If they're not talkative, that's really hard, but
yeah, their speaking voice, getting that to feel like a real thing in your head is really helpful. But also I really do agree with Kristen in that like it's a long road to getting them to feel real. And don't fault yourself for not being able to conjure a human being on the page instantly. It is truly hard and takes drafts and drafts and drafts.
And it's so different from that moment before you start writing when you think you know this person. You can feel this person, but trying to turn them into words is a whole other thing.
We have like 1 minute left. So I'm just gonna ask, do you have any current reads that you're really enjoying or a recent fave that you're enjoying?
I came prepared.
Oh my gosh, I need the book.
I just read Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Booley. It's wonderful. It's sad. It's wonderful. This is my recommendation for the moment.
I am currently reading Beasts of Prey by Ayana Gray, and it is a book coming out in September, and it is so good.
Yay!
He's with my editor, and I keep telling my editor, like, when the arcs are here, they need to be in my email. Yay, I'm really excited for that one. And all those books you can buy. I mean, you can't buy Briefs of Prey yet, but in the future you can buy them from Nowhere Books in San Antonio. And remember, you can get everyone's books at Nowhere Bookshop, and there should be sort of a buy link on the festival website.
And
Thank you all
this
for
is a book
coming.
I'm very excited about reading, by the way, Amanda.
Oh, yeah, that's my book. It came out like almost a month ago now, which is mad.
Congratulations!
My dog has had it with me. All right, I think we're about 7:45, so I will let you guys go. Thank you so much. This is so fun.
Thank you so much.
Amanda.
Thank you all for coming to listen.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah, have a good weekend.
Have a good one. Thank you.